Hey, what's up, VC? It's Steve again, Harmless Rebel, and we're going to do part 2 of the Q&A for my 800 subs. So let's just kind of jump into it. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll put a link down below. So we're going to jump off. We finished up with Captain Handlebar's questions. So next up, we got John Bitbot Boom. Can you tell me about one of your favorite blues artists or records that you own? Blues is kind of hard. Although I do like blues, and I'm actually getting into it more now. I mean, I've always kind of dug like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Robert Johnson. I got into in the early '90s, and I absolutely love Robert Johnson. Now I'm kind of getting into the English blues guys. I've always been into Eric Clapton. He's not one of my favorites, but I do love his stuff with Derek and the Dominoes, and I love Layla, the album. But my favorite blues artist is Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix, The Blues, that album is by far my all-time favorite blues album. His blues stuff is, I love everything Jimi Hendrix ever released, but his blues stuff is really special. And it's the stuff, the music of his that I've always gravitated most towards. So it would definitely be Jimi Hendrix, The Blues. The Robert Johnson would be right there behind it, though. I love the Robert Johnson stuff. I've been getting real heavy into Peter Green, which is more on the English blues side, or the UK blues side. I haven't got a whole lot into a lot of the American blues, the classic American blues from the 30s, 40s, 50s. I know the Howlin', or not Howlin' Wolves. I've heard a lot of that stuff, but I don't really know it that well. I do know a lot of the newer stuff. Recently, somebody turned me on to Joe Bonamassa, and I've kind of been digging his blues stuff, and I've got some albums from Kenny Wayne Shepherd, and I can't think of the other. I like the Derek Trucks stuff, so I like a lot of the modern stuff too. But maybe you could recommend some stuff for me, John, and I'll check it out. But Jimi Hendrix, The Blues, one of the best blues albums ever. Next up, what's one of your guilty pleasures, most embarrassing records that you've owned? One of my early contests, maybe 300 or 400 subs, I don't know, I did it a few years ago, where that was the question. Show me one of your guilty pleasures, guilty pleasures, and I showed mine. Mine's the Bee Gees. I've always loved the Bee Gees. I like their early Beatles sounding stuff, and I even like their more disco stuff. The soundtrack from Grease, the soundtrack from Staying Alive. I love all that stuff. Something about the Gibbs brothers I've always dug. And it may just be, my mom was real big into Staying Alive, and I can't remember the follow-up movie to Staying Alive, but she loved those movies. Grease was another movie that she loved. I liked that movie too. I liked the whole rockabilly look of it, Actually, one of my all-time favorite movies is Cry Baby, which I'm sure, John, you know. But if you guys haven't seen Cry Baby, it's kind of a spoof of Grease. Very, very good movie, though. One I highly recommend checking out if you guys haven't checked that one out. But so the Bee Gees. Next up, we got Al Gore's Head. I was in the military and wondering if you were. Yes, I was. If you could you talk a bit about that? Yeah, I was in the Navy for 9 years. I actually would have stayed in. I blew out my ankle, and after over a year of light duty and a number of surgeries, they decided to medically separate me. In hindsight, I wish I would have fought that. I could have and pretty easily won, but I decided I was still young, and I wanted to decided I'd like to pursue something else with my family. So I ended up getting out after 9 years. I spent most of that time in Japan. I was stationed in at NAF Atsugi, which is right near Yokohama. It's about 45 minutes from Tokyo, and I loved every minute of it. I was there for 7.5 of my 9 years. So 2 full tours in Japan. I spent 2.5 years actually at sea. Most of that was my first tour. My second tour I was on shore duty, but my first tour, 2.5 years of my first 4 years, was actually at sea. A little over a year of that was in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, where I visited. I went to Dubai, or Jebel Ali, which is where the port was, I think 13 times. And then I went to Bahrain a couple times. But I've been all over the Middle East, or all over Asia. I've been to Hawaii, Australia, where else? Thailand. I went to Hong Kong when it was part of England, and when it was part of, after it became part of China again. Been to Korea a bunch of times. I've been all over the place down there. Let's see. What is the first record that you could say was yours? So I've talked about this before. I don't remember. I found some records. I know my parents gave me some records when I was really young. And I'm talking maybe 80, 81. And, I had one of those Fisher-Price record players during that time. I know I had like some Kenny Rogers. I know I had like the Gambler at some point. I remember those being... Kenny Rogers is some of my earlier... I don't remember the first one, though, that they gave me that was mine. I remember the first cassette tape that I bought. The first cassette tape that I bought was Men at Work, Business as Usual. The first record that I bought, and I've talked about this before, was a few years later. And I don't remember which one it was. It was either the Fat Boys Are Back, which my dad still has in his collection in Florida. And then another one I bought was the California Raisins, like the California Raisins Sing the Hits, which sounds kind of silly. It's actually a great album if you run across it. It's actually Buddy Miles doing Motown classics. Phenomenal. He does a great job. And it's all big name musicians that are with him. So as goofy as that sounds, it's actually a great album. Let's see. What was the first one you bought yourselves? I already covered that. Vintage wine. What do you do for a living? Right now, I do nothing for a living. I am actually... my background is in training. After I got out of the military, I went to school. I got my bachelor's degree in software engineering. Even though I was really good at it, coding just kind of bored me. I was always happy and excited when I completed a program and I had gone through all the debugging and everything was working right. But I've never really enjoyed the whole process, and especially when you're doing large scale programs, you spend just as much time debugging and QAing your work, and that's just always... I learned very fast that wasn't for me. I did a lot of training in the military, not just teaching, but running training programs. And that's something I really enjoyed. So I went and I got my master's degree in adult education and training. Right now, I'm actually in the interview, towards the end of the interview process for an adjunct professor position with one of the local universities out here. And if I got that position, I would be teaching in the classroom 3 days a week and teaching online 2. So that would be really cool. So all you out there, say a little prayer or put out your good thoughts to the universe for me. But education is really my background. And that's what I've been doing the last 10 years, working in the university system. So what does your screen name come from? I've talked about this before. I couldn't for the life of me think of a screen name. And I went to one of those band name maker websites. Or maybe I came to the band name web. Either way, I don't remember if I came up with the name from that website and then later started my channel, or vice versa. But that's where Harmless Rebel came from. I was clicking through like the band name generators and Harmless Rebel popped up. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's it. That's the one I want. And like I said, I don't remember if that was something I did before, and when I decided to make the channel, that just stuck in my head, or if when I was making the channel, I couldn't think of a name and use that. But either way, from a band name generator. And that was Vintage Wine, those last two questions. Next up, we've got Hermer Metal. Is that Visigoth playing in the background? Yes, I did a video, the 800 subs contest video. This album, Final Spell, from Visigoth was playing in the background on Sword and Chains Records. Nathan, Chemical Warfare 86, turned me on to this website, or to this label, and I've bought quite a bit from them and other albums that they sell through their label. But this is number 100 of 1,000. It was a limited pressing they did. Killer EP. I really dig this, and I highly recommend you guys check that out. So yes, that was Visigoth. What's your favorite album from 2016? That's hard. I really like Megadeth. Actually, it would be a toss-up between probably the Megadeth and then Brotherhood of the Snake. Definitely two of my favorites from last year, but it's hard to say, man. So many good albums came out last year. I really love the new Gojira album too, Magma. They've gone more a progressive route, and it's kind of a mix of the progressive and the melodic death that they did earlier on in their career, and just a really solid album that I dig. So those are some of my favorites, and I know there's a lot more. As soon as I'm done with this video, more are going to come to mind, but those are the first things, the first few that pop into my head. Let's see. Next up, we've got Merely Chris, and we finally made it to the second page. Merely Chris. Who is your favorite UK artist or band? That one's pretty easy. That would be the mighty... Judas Priest. Judas Priest is just, without a doubt, one of my all-time favorite bands. Iron Maiden would be pretty close there as well. Black Sabbath. Actually, Black Sabbath may be a little more than... No, I'm going to stick with Judas Priest. Black Sabbath's the one that led me to them, but yeah, Judas Priest is where it's at. I love Judas Priest. Let's see. What is your most disappointing live experience you've had? I.e. an act where you were really looking forward to seeing, but ultimately hated the show. That's an easy one. I've talked about this before. So in 94 or 95, I went to see Primus, and I found out that Mike Watt was opening for Primus. Mike Watt was the bass player in the Minutemen, who are one of my favorite punk bands. Unfortunately, after doing a show in Phoenix, their bus was in a car accident, or their van. They were in a car accident in their van, and the lead singer was killed. And that was the end of the Minutemen. But they were an amazing, amazing band. Mike Watt is just a phenomenal bass player. So I was kind of stoked to hear him too. He came on and he started playing, and I don't know what the hell was going on. It was him playing bass and singing, and there were two drummers playing, and they were both playing. One was off the music. I don't know if that was intentional, but it was terrible. And the crowd started booing like crazy, throwing water bottles at the stage. The crowd went nuts. He didn't even make it to a second song before being booed off stage. And then he came up to the mic and starts talking about how he's a classic punk, an old school punk. He'll come out into the audience and fuck every one of us up that's booing at him. And he basically threw a temper tantrum on stage. And it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I've been to a lot of shows. I've been to some bad shows where the sound systems were terrible, but the music kind of overcame that, or the vibe of it overcame that, which was the case with one of the Ozfests that I went to. But that was by far the worst. And then, unfortunately, by the time Primus came on, like half an hour later, they were nice enough, because he was supposed to do an hour-long set, Mike Watt, and they ended up coming on like 20 or 30 minutes early. Primus did. But the band was already riled up, and they started throwing bottles at Primus, and Les Claypool's bass got hit, and he almost walked off a stage. He said if one more bottle hit him, he was gone. Luckily, that didn't happen, and it turned out to be an amazing... Primus was phenomenal. Les Claypool live, it doesn't get much better than that. And actually, to add to that experience, I was with a girl that I had just started dating named Jennifer, and... we were standing right next to the mosh pit. I don't know if I've told this before, but Here Come the Bastards came on, which is one of my favorite Primus songs, and everybody's moshing and going crazy. And we were sitting right next to the mosh pit, and some guy slammed into her, shoulder first, hit her in the face, and her tooth went through her bottom lip. And there's blood everywhere. I thought she was going to be freaking out. She just wipes it off and just gets back into the music and just starts partying. And later on, she was like, that was that was like her war scar. Anytime we talked about concerts, she would show her war scar. She thought it was the coolest thing. So really cool experience. Let's see. Next up, we got Brother Scott Waters. I know you spent time in Brazil and Japan. If you could live in any other country besides the U.S., where would you live? It would be Japan. I loved. I've also lived in Germany as well for a number of years. I've never lived in Brazil. Brazil's an amazing place to visit. I'm actually going there again later on this year for my brother-in-law's wedding, but I would never want to live there. Not the place to live. The crime, the poverty. The middle class, what we consider our poor, live at a much better level than the middle class does in Brazil. It's amazing the kind of stuff that we here in the U.S. complain about. Especially if you've been to places like Brazil, and that's not the only country. I've been all over the world. There's places way worse than Brazil, but Japan, I just love everything about Japan. I love the people. I love the community. I love the atmosphere. There's no crime there. The music scene is phenomenal. The car scene is phenomenal. It's a westernized. It's got all the good things about westernized society without all the bullshit that goes along with it. And I really love it there. What's the earliest albums you bought that got you into hard rock and metal? That one, Motley Crue. I don't remember. I think it was Theater of Pain. I go back and forth. Sometimes I say Shout at the Devil. It's because I honestly, I can't quite remember which one I got first. A lot of people hate this album. I absolutely love it. And it may just be because that's one of the early ones. But I was really part of the MTV generation. I was watching MTV from Go in, what was it, 81 when it came out. I was a latchkey kid, and I would come home, and back then cable, we think of cable now with hundreds of channels. Cable, regular TV you have like 5 channels, and then cable you have like 35 channels, 40 channels, and MTV was one of the free channels that we got. So I was glued to the television, and a lot of those early hard rock and heavy metal bands were the bands that got me into hard rock and heavy metal. AC/DC would be the other one. So I would say AC/DC and Motley Crue are the two bands that really got me into hard rock and heavy metal. Blackmore Rules. Which song is better, Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic or Deep Purple's Burn? For me, it's Toys in the Attic. I love Deep Purple. I like Aerosmith better. I didn't get into Deep Purple until much later. Whereas Aerosmith, my dad was an Aerosmith fan. So I've heard Aerosmith my entire life growing up. So that's it. If Kiss and Black Sabbath were playing the same night and you could only go see one in your favorite era, who would you see? It would be Black Sabbath. I've actually never seen Black Sabbath live. I was really hoping to see them on this final tour, and they didn't play anywhere close to here, and not even within driving distance, which disappointed me quite a bit. But Kiss, I've talked about this. I saw them live for the first time in 2011. They were doing like maybe the 75 or 76 stage show. I can't. They said what it was, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But and I loved it. I was absolutely blown away by it. It was an amazing show. And I've seen Ozzy a shitload of times, but I would love to have seen Black Sabbath in the 70s. So those were Blackmore Rules. Next up, we've got the Vinyl Brothers. How did music collecting evolve for you through the years? How will it be in the future? I've always kind of collected music. My dad loved music. He had, 100, 150 records, probably another 100 or so cassettes, and that's not even, doesn't include the stuff he recorded. I mean, you can see right here, this receiver that I'm using right here was my dad's receiver. He bought that brand new, and that wasn't a cheap receiver. That was like $600 back when that came out in '81. Same thing with the EQ next to it. That's the original EQ. That was his back in '81, '82. And again, that was like $300, $800 for a stereo system in 1981. That's a lot of fucking money. So music was always really prominent in my house. And so my dad's collecting kind of passed off onto me. Now I've taken it to a whole new extreme than he did. But, but I started, I started with cassettes. I had vinyl early on. I didn't really consider myself a collector back then. I would get records and listen to them. But it was with cassettes that I really started getting into music and really keeping music and recording hours and hours of radio, and then going back and taking my favorite songs from that tape and cutting it down to another cassette. So I would have my favorite songs recorded off the radio, and I would make the mixtapes that way. And I did that for years. We were really poor. After my parents split up, my mom was raising four of us. She made 20-something thousand a year. She was getting child support for me and me and one of my sisters, but the other two kids, their dad was a deadbeat. So money was always an issue. So there was no money for me to get music. So, but I was able to go to dollar stores and find blank cassettes. You'd get a pack of 3 really cheap cassettes for $1.50 or whatever, and I would take those and record music and kind of make my own stuff. And then as I had money, I would buy comps from Circle K or 7-Eleven. They had all the K-Tel type comps, and I would get stuff that way. And then my dad would buy stuff for Christmas and birthdays. So I started collecting that way. For me, it was collecting songs, collecting all my favorite songs on these mixtapes, and occasionally getting a cassette, And then in the early 90s, when I started having money of my own, I started buying music right away. The first group of CDs that I got was from Columbia House. I got some Anthrax and some Jimi Hendrix and some Bob Marley. And I've actually still got most of those in one of my CD booklets around here somewhere. And I've talked about that before. From there, and I talked about this a little bit on the video earlier, when my band started playing, at that time I had more money, so I was really investing in CDs. If you watch my death metal video, I talk more about it, where I started getting into death metal and stuff like that. I started really buying CDs and really collecting music and really getting into music in the early to mid 90s. Then I started DJing in Japan, and at one point I think I was up to 6,000 CDs. And I sold off most of those in 2000 to 2008. After I got out of the military, I burned it all to my computer and sold off most of my CDs, which is, I still kick myself for now. And then about 2012, 2013, I started getting into vinyl. These weren't my first records. I've actually got some records that I've had since 99, 2000. That were gifted to me by a friend, but 99.9% of my collection has been bought since about 2013 to today. So that's where we are. Let's see, which album is number 1 on your want list? I already... Oh, man. I already kind of talked about that. It's How the Gods Kill from Danzig right now. I want all originals of all the Danzig albums, but that How the Gods Kill is my favorite. I've got a bootleg of his first album, of his debut. That's actually my least favorite. I know that's everybody's favorite because of Mother, but that would be my third. I should say my least favorite. My least favorite would be Black Acid Devil, but How the Gods Kill and Lucifuge are my favorite albums. And then he did one, what's the one with Black Angel, White Angel? I don't remember if that's 777 or if that was Circle of Snakes. But anyway, but I would like to have those. I'd love to have originals of the Sam Hain stuff. I got into Sam Hain the same time that I got into Danzig, and I love all that stuff, and I would love to have originals of that as well. But yeah, number one would be How the Gods Kill, Danzig 3. Nasty Metal Productions. What band do you think should have called it quits, and why do you think so? This one's easy. I've talked about this dozens of times. It's Sepultura. I think they should have called it quits when Max left the band, but once Igor left the band, they sure the hell should have called it quits and at least changed their name. What they're playing now is nothing compared to what they played back in the day. I've heard they play good music. I can't even bring myself to listen to it. I listened to a couple of their stuff. I think Kairos, I checked out. Dante, is it XI or XL? I checked out. And they were decent, but Andreas Kisser just isn't a great writer. I haven't been a fan, really, of anything that they put out. I've heard their new album is great. Whatever. They've already... I'm already past that. You've got a band now that has one original member in Paolo Jr., who doesn't write any music. And actually, in their first few albums, didn't even play on their recorded music. They brought in other bassists to actually record because he wasn't good enough. Now, he has learned to play over the years. He's a pretty good bassist now. But he's the only original member left in the band. Andreas Kisser didn't come around until... was it their third album? They did the 2 EPs, and Schizophrenia is where Andreas Kisser came around. He wasn't really a big writer either. He definitely added to the guitar sound, but it was Max that wrote almost everything in that band, and it just went to shit after he left. I was lucky enough to see them right before they split up. I saw them in, I think, September oh man, what year was that? 2007? No, I'm sorry, 1997. It may have been 96. I think it was December of 96 when they split up. So I saw them in, I believe, September. So right before Max Cavalera left the band. But like I said, Max Cavalera and Igor Cavalera are Sepultura. And it's funny. They made a joke about it, they're still making money off of it. They still own Sepultura. It's still their band. And I don't know why... I kind of wish once Igor left, they would have taken Andreas to court and taken the name back, because they do own it. But they had decided that they've moved on since then, which, I kind of respect that too. But yeah, Sepultura. I could go on. What is by far the worst trend I've ever seen in my life? Oh my God, dude, I'm 40. I've seen so many bad trends, and I've seen so many trends that I thought were going to be good that went bad, and vice versa. It's hard to say. I don't know. I don't really keep up on a lot of the trends. I'm not a big fan of the whole hipster thing, and there's so many things about the hipsters that I could choose. Trends in music when it comes to black metal. I was talking about this with Aaron. Once the black metal music went symphonic, I kind of lost interest. With death metal, once it became all about speed, I kind of lost interest. There's so many things, and there's so many trends that I hated originally. I wasn't a big fan of doom metal. When it really got big in the 90s, and again in the 2000s when it came back and got big again, and I love it now. So trends that I don't like now, I may like a few years from now, and vice versa. There's trends I may hate now that I may like a few years from now. So it's kind of hard to talk on that. Cloudy Milder, what country not already visited would you most like to go to record digging in, and why? I would have to say the UK, and I'm not just saying that because that's where you are. My other choice would be Germany, but I used to live in Germany, so you've already kind of knocked that out by saying that I haven't someplace you haven't visited. I've never been to the UK, and I would love to visit. I mean, there's record stores like Rough Trade that have been in the UK forever, that have these long histories. And I would love to be able to visit some of those stores that have been around forever like that. I think that would be cool. Favorite Priest album from each generation? Man, that's hard. From the 70s, Stained Class. I've talked about that before. From the 80s is a little bit harder. I'm going to go with Screamin'. From the 90s, Painkiller. From the 2000s, their most recent album. I really like their most recent album. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me. But, yeah. 80s is kind of the hardest to choose. Screaming for Vengeance is amazing. But so is British Steel. That's a hard... But I'd have to go with Screaming for Vengeance. Let's see... Then rate them worst to first. Holy shit. So I've talked... Stained Class is my favorite Priest album. I put them in that order. Of those four, Stained Class would be number 1. Number 2 would be Screaming for Vengeance. Number 3 would be Painkiller. And number 4 would be the newest... God, why... I can't think of the name of the new album. Oh well. Vinyl Potato, what's your favorite punk rock band? I actually talked about that in my last video. Dead Kennedys. I absolutely love the Dead Kennedys. There's one other band that I would put above them. However, I don't really consider them punk rock, and I'll talk about that in another video in the future. But without a doubt, it's the Dead Kennedys. I'm a huge fan of Jello Biafra in general. I love watching every video that he does. I love his spoken word stuff, even though I don't agree with a lot of his politics. He's a guy that I really respect, and even the stuff where we don't agree, he's good. His argument makes a lot of sense, and I understand why he feels the way he does about those particular things. And as I mentioned in my last video, I went on a kind of a rant. If you guys watched that last miscellaneous vinyl update that I did, but he stands behind his politics no matter what no matter who's in office, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. His beliefs don't change, and he doesn't stop talking and pointing out the negatives when one versus the other is in office, which you see from a lot of punk bands. So that's Vinyl Potato. And then we've got one more, and I'm going to put an end to this one because we're already at 33 minutes. Next we got Christian Grillo. Inactive, broken up band you would most like to see a comeback record from. Oh man. That's a hard one. Because, I find that most bands that break up, there's usually a reason for it, and their music, especially the bigger bands, kind of tends to wane towards the end of their careers. So, if we're talking bands that members are no longer around, I'd love to see a Thin Lizzy album. But again, towards the end, their music was kind of waning with Phil and Lynot's drug use. So that's kind of a hard one for me. I would, and then a lot of bands that I would like to see the original lineup come back together. Again, like Alice in Chains, but Lane Staley's dead. They're still putting out amazing music though. Actually, and sadly, we just lost Chris Cornell yesterday or the day before, and Soundgarden was one of the bands that I really wanted to see get back together, and and they finally get back together, and now Chris Cornell has passed away or committed suicide, which is just the news has just broke on that. So, and then his last question is: you've worn a Marquise Colston jersey in past videos. Is he your favorite Saint? If not, who is? If you guys aren't American football fans, when I was doing a video for Backwoods Metal, I was wearing a Marquise Colston jersey for the New Orleans Saints. I'm a huge New Orleans Saints fan. I'm 100% Cajun. My whole family's from Louisiana. I used to live in Metairie, which is right down the road from where the Saints practice. Marquise Colston is not my favorite player. My all-time favorite player for the Saints is Dalton Hilliard, who was a running back for the Saints back in the 80s during the days of the Dome Patrol. I was also a big Deuce McAllister fan, who spent his entire career as a really hard-nosed running back. I'm a big fan of Drew Brees. Pat Swilling from the Dome Patrol was a favorite of mine. There's a bunch, but if I had to pick one, it would be Dalton Hilliard. Really underrated guy. He was a phenomenal running back, and just didn't get a lot of credit because the Saints were such a bad team during that period. I'll do one more. Vinyl Confections has 2 quick questions. Is it pop or soda? For me, it's soda, but I don't say soda. If I ask somebody for a drink, it's usually, if I want a Mountain Dew, I want a Mountain Dew. It's not like I want a soda. And that was a big argument because most of my family says pop in Louisiana, and I said soda. And anyway. And then his second question was, what do you want written on your tombstone? I don't think about that stuff. I thinking about death is kind of macabre to me. I only think about it to the extent that, I have a living will and all that stuff to take care of my daughter and family if something happens to me and my life insurance and stuff like that. But thinking about stuff like that just puts me in a negative place. I just don't like going there. So that's it, guys. This has gone on for way too long, this one. I'll get the part 3 up pretty soon. Take care, VC.